Most of the time, Pokemon facts are fun to learn because they teach you something new about the franchise that you didn't know before. But other times, you'll come across facts that you'd probably be better off not knowing about. And that is what this video is all about. It's gonna be a lot of fun, but watch at your own risk. And with that said, let's get to it. So these ridiculous facts are being made possible thanks in part to today's sponsor, Dave. Dave's support helps to keep making videos like this one happening, and they can also help you when you need a little support as well. Life can get crazy for a million different reasons, and in those times, we could all use some extra funds to help us through. And Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. It's part of Dave's Extra Cash account. Advance the money when you need with no interest, and then settle up later. Essentially, if you need some extra dough for life's unexpected moments, Dave can help you out so you don't have to just keep waiting for that paycheck to show up. If that sounds like something that would interest you, you can download Dave today at dave.com/hoops. That's dave.com/hoops. You could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less when you download Dave. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/hoops. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC. And again, a big thank you to Dave for supporting the channel. Alright, so this first one concerns Chimchar. You might think that Chimchar is cute, but you also might think that it's a little less cute when you learn that it creates fire, including the fire on its backside in its official artwork, with its farts. Its Pokedex entries in Pearl and Heart Gold and Soul Silver say that its fiery rear end is fueled by gas made in its belly. Even rain can't extinguish the fire. The gas made in its belly burns from its rear end. The fire burns weakly when it feels sick. This essentially means that whenever you battle with Chimchar and the flame is burning on its behind, it is farting on you. And since that flame is almost always burning, that means that Chimchar is farting almost non-stop. So yeah, just keep that in mind the next time you have to make a choice between the Sinnoh starters. Speaking of Gen 4, I was kind of looking it over recently, and they introduced a lot of wild stuff in this generation. For example, there's the aforementioned Chimchar, who farts nearly 24/7, and Game Freak must have had a love affair with farts at this time because they also introduced a Pokemon in Skuntank, and arguably two with Stunky, whose cries are literally farts. They did not hold back with this either, because Skuntank's cry in particular legitimately sounds nasty. There's also the fact that they introduced a Pokemon based on a Playboy bunny in this generation, a Pokemon that is literally based on the devil, a new sprite of a Pokemon where it's doing a Nazi salute, which had to be changed in some versions of the games, and even a Pokemon in Drifloon who kidnaps children and takes them to the afterlife. All I can say to this is that Game Freak was apparently going through it in Generation 4. Pokemon with crazy origins and concepts aren't just reserved for Gen 4, however. If you thought it was wild that they would make a Pokemon based on a Playboy bunny, for example, just wait until you're properly introduced to Tsareena, because this Pokemon is heavily based on a dominatrix. The crazy thing about this, though, is that it's not just like a slight peppering of influence. This Pokemon is legitimately heavily based on some BDSM activities. For example, if you just look at its design, you can kinda start to get the vibe with its legs that are meant to resemble thigh-high boots, but then the real craziness comes within the finer details of this Pokemon, as it evolves from Steenie when leveled up while knowing Stomp. And it can also learn other moves such as Power Whip, Punishment, and Play Rough. So Game Freak didn't just base a Pokemon on a Dominatrix, they literally went all in on basing a Pokemon on a Dominatrix. Now I want to talk about a couple of facts that probably won't scar you for life like some of these others might, but they might leave you face-palming due to the fact that it could change the way you look at these Pokemon forever. For example, Slowpoke is a pretty iconic Pokemon for how slow it is. Like, it's a literal Slowpoke, that's not just its name. But on top of that, you could make the argument that Slowpoke got its name either in real life or simply just within the Pokemon canon because it is the slow Pokemon, as in its name is literally just a shortened version of the term slow Pokemon. Seeing as how it took me 25 plus years before I even noticed this though, it could very well be the case that I am in fact the slow one. My next fact of a similar variety concerns Politoed. At face value, Politoed gets its name from the fact that it's a toad. I mean, it's literally right in the name. This, however, is not in fact the case. It doesn't get its name from being a toad, as it's literally known as the frog Pokemon, so much so as it gets its name from the fact that it has toes, which is distinctive for it, as every other member of its evolutionary family does not have toes, thus making it worthy of a name for this Pokemon. It is a member of the Poly family that is Toad. Politoed. You will never look at this guy the same way again, and I'm sorry for bringing this to your attention. As we have already touched on at this point, Pokemon can sometimes gain some morbid inspirations from some interesting places, and that is certainly the case with these next two facts. For example, it might be surprising to know, and is somewhat strange, that Wailmer and Wailord can learn the move Self-Destruct, as these are obviously very organic Pokemon. They're not like the more mechanical Pokemon like, say, Electrode and Voltorb, who the move makes a bit more sense for. However, there is still a specific reason why these Pokemon can learn this move that does justify it, but can also leave you feeling a little grossed out at the same time. These Pokemon knowing this move is most likely based on the exploding whale phenomenon, where beached whale carcasses will sometimes explode due to a buildup of gas within the body during decomposition. It is also likely based on the practice of exploding whales, where whale carcasses will intentionally be blown up by people as a means of disposing of the body. Another water-type Pokemon with some more unusual origins is Staryu. Despite not ever being mentioned in the English language versions of Pokemon, Staryu has been mentioned in the Japanese exclusive Pocket Monsters Encyclopedia book, as well as within the Japanese version of the anime, to be a hermaphrodite. A hermaphrodite is an organism that can essentially be either male or female for the purposes of breeding. Even though this is never specified on the English side of things, it actually explains a lot about Staryu's design, including the fact that it is a gender-unknown Pokemon, and the fact that in Generation 2, it could learn the move Attract, even though as a gender-unknown Pokemon, this move would be completely useless. One Pokemon with arguably one of the most morbid origins of all time is Misdreavus. It's also a Pokemon with one of the most questionable origins of all time, as Misdreavus is likely based on suicide victims of the Aokigahara Forest in Japan. Obviously, there's the fact that this Pokemon is a ghost type, which stands out, but then there's also the fact that despite being a Gen 2 Pokemon, the only place that you can find Misdreavus in the Gen 2 games is at Mount Silver, which is literally the last area of the game that you can access even after the Kanto postgame. This is significant with regards to its origin because Mount Silver is based on Mount Fuji in Japan, and at the base of Mount Fuji is the Aokigahara Forest, which is known as a popular suicide site in Japan. Lastly, the final point that essentially confirms that this is in fact the case is the fact that it has been discovered that the area outside of Mount Silver was once a forested area in one of the game's beta stages. This was no doubt changed due to the reputation of the real-life area and the fact that they had literally designed a ghost-type Pokémon for it. But nevertheless, despite taking out this forested area, they still kept Misdreavus in the games anyway, as ultimately a remnant of this morbid concept. On that note, Gen 2 might actually rival Gen 4 in terms of introducing some wild stuff, because on top of Misdreavus, Gen 2 also introduced multiple Pokémon that have some roots in alcohol. For example, Shuckle is a Pokémon who originally started as more of an alcoholic Pokémon than it is now, as a beta design for it shows it with a slightly different design, being encased in what appears to be a pot rather than a shell, and it was also known as the fermentation Pokémon at the time as well. Putting two and two together, it's very possible that Shuckle was originally based on snake wine, an alcoholic beverage where whole snakes are inserted into a bottle with the alcohol itself. Shuckle was eventually toned down from this in the final release, but it does make its signature berry juice item that it produces make a lot more sense. This alcoholic inspiration, surprisingly enough, ended up being carried on by Dunsparce though, as it also has similar inspirations. This is most notably seen in its evolution, Dunsparce, where the segments of its body are meant to resemble a wine gourd. This is due to its inspiration, the Tsuchinoko, reportedly having a propensity for alcohol. We are now going to come back around to Gen 7, where, as we've already established, things can also get a little wild. The Pokemon Araquanid is one that already has a vicious demeanor, and its Pokédex entries tell a story that are equal parts dark and sad. In its Moon Dex entry, it's stated that despite what its appearance suggests, it cares for others. If it finds vulnerable, weak Pokemon, it protectively brings them into its water bubble. But then, its Sun Dex entry says it delivers headbutts with the water bubble on its head. Small Pokemon get sucked into the bubble where they drown. So, putting both of these dex entries together, Araquanid is essentially a caring Pokemon that will bring small, weak Pokemon into its water bubble in order to protect them, but then it ends up actually killing them as a result, even though it seems like it doesn't intend to. I almost feel like it would be better if it did intend to though, because at that point it would still be dark, but at least it wouldn't be sad, and that is why you would probably be better off if you didn't know anything about this at all. With that said, if you did in fact enjoy this video though, even if I potentially scarred you, let me know in the comments below and leave a like as well because it really helps out. Be sure to subscribe for more if you haven't yet too, and if you'd like to support the channel further, you can always do so by checking out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify or wherever you get your music, which helps out a lot and is extremely appreciated. I'll be back right here with another video very soon as well, and until then, as always, thanks so much for watching this one. I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.